The afternoon sun pressed down on Highway 44 like a punishment, the asphalt shimmering with heat that rose in waves and made the horizon dance. Harold's left arm was wrapped around his wife's waist, holding her upright, though his own legs trembled with each step. His right hand gripped Dorothy's fingers, the same fingers he'd held at their wedding 48 years ago, the same fingers that had wiped his tears when his mother died, the same fingers that had packed lunches for their children every morning for 2 decades. Now those fingers were swollen, bruised, scraped raw from trying to break a fall she should never have taken. "Just a little further," Harold said, though he had no idea where further led. "Just a little more, Dot." Dorothy didn't answer. She hadn't spoken in over an hour, not since they'd stopped to rest in the shade of a dying oak tree, and she'd looked at her reflection in a mud puddle. The left side of her face was purple and yellow, her eye nearly swollen shut, her lip was split, her white hair, always so carefully pinned, hung loose and tangled, streaked with dirt and something darker that Harold refused to name. She was 71 years old. She had taught Sunday school for 30 years. She had never raised her hand to anyone, not even when the children were at their most defiant. And her own son had done this to her. Their own son. Harold felt his chest tighten, and he wasn't sure if it was his heart or his soul. Maybe both. Maybe they were the same thing at his age. After a day like this, "Car coming," he said, his voice hoarse from dust and grief. They both turned, squinting against the glare. A silver sedan approached from the east, growing larger, engine humming. Harold raised his free hand, the one not holding his wife together, and waved. Not frantically. He was too tired for frantic. Just a simple gesture. "Please. We need help. Please." The sedan slowed. For one blessed moment, Harold thought it would stop. He saw the driver's face through the windshield. A woman, maybe 40, sunglasses pushed up on her head. She saw them. He knew she saw them. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second that stretched into eternity. Then she looked away. The sedan accelerated, swinging wide to pass them, putting as much distance between her vehicle and their broken bodies as the road allowed. Harold watched the taillights grow smaller, then disappear around a curve, and felt something inside him crack. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, keep walking, Dot. Someone will stop. Someone has to stop." But he wasn't sure he believed it anymore. 48 hours earlier, Harold and Dorothy Mercer had been sitting on the porch of the home they'd built together, drinking coffee from matching mugs their granddaughter had painted at summer camp. The farmhouse wasn't fancy. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen that Dorothy had remodeled twice with her own hands, a living room where 4 decades of Christmas trees had stood. The roof needed new shingles, the porch steps creaked, the septic system was older than some of their grandchildren, but it was theirs. Every nail, every board, every memory pressed into the walls like flowers in a book. Harold had built the addition when Michael was born, expanding the house to fit their growing family. Dorothy had planted the garden, the rose bushes, the apple trees that still produced fruit every September. They'd paid off the mortgage in 1998, had the papers framed, hung them in the hallway like a diploma. This house represented everything they'd worked for, everything they'd sacrificed. And that, Harold now understood, was the problem. Their 3 children had grown up in that house. Michael, the eldest, had been a difficult child, willful, ambitious, always calculating. But Harold and Dorothy had loved him the same as the others, maybe more, because difficult children need more love to soften their edges. They'd paid for his college, his first car, his first apartment. They'd loaned him money to start his business and never asked for it back when the business failed. They'd babysat his children while he and his wife built their careers, never asking for payment, never keeping score. Jennifer, their middle child, had been sweeter in temperament but no less demanding. She'd married twice, divorced twice, and each time Harold and Dorothy had been there with open doors and open wallets. They'd helped with attorney fees, with moving costs, with the endless small crises that seemed to follow Jennifer like weather. And Thomas, the baby of the family, had simply drifted. He'd never found his footing, never held a job for more than 2 years, never managed to live within his means. Harold and Dorothy had supplemented his income quietly for decades, buying groceries when he was short, paying utility bills so his lights wouldn't be cut off, never mentioning it to the other children. They had given and given and given, and they had done it gladly, because that's what parents do. You don't keep a ledger. You don't expect repayment. You love your children, and you help them, and you trust that the love you've poured into them will somehow, someday, come back. Harold understood now that the ledger had been kept all along, just not by him. It started 2 months ago, with a question. Michael had driven up on a Sunday afternoon, unannounced, which was unusual. He lived 3 hours away and rarely visited without calling first. When he walked through the door, he didn't hug his mother, didn't ask about his father's back, which had been troubling him. He just stood in the living room, hands in his pockets, and said, "We need to talk about the house." Harold had been confused. "What about the house?" "You're getting older," Michael said. "Both of you. Mom forgot Jennifer's birthday last month. Dad, you can barely climb the porch steps anymore. It's time to start thinking about the future." "We're not dead yet," Dorothy said from the kitchen doorway. "No one said you were." Michael's voice was patient, the way you'd speak to a child who doesn't understand. "But this property is worth something now. The land alone, 7 acres. There's developers interested in this area. If you transferred the deed to us kids now, while you're still competent, we could start planning. You could live here until, for as long as you need, but the asset would be protected." "Protected from what?" Harold asked. Michael shrugged. "Nursing homes, medical bills. The government takes everything if you don't plan ahead." Harold had felt something cold settle in his stomach, but he pushed it down. This was his son, his firstborn. Surely this was just concern, expressed clumsily. "We'll think about it," he said. But Michael didn't want them to think about it. He wanted them to sign papers. Papers he'd brought with him, prepared by a lawyer Harold had never met. Papers that would transfer the deed to all 3 children, with Harold and Dorothy retaining only life rights, the legal permission to live in their own home until they died. When Harold said no, gently, carefully, explaining that they needed time to consider such a big decision, something shifted in Michael's face. "You always do this," he said. "You always make things difficult." "Son, we're not making anything difficult. We're just asking for time." "Time for what? Time to give everything to some charity? Time to let the government take it? We're your children. We have a right to know what's going to happen to our inheritance." Harold had felt the cold thing in his stomach turn to ice. Inheritance. Not your home, not your life's work. Our inheritance. "I think you should leave now," Dorothy said quietly. "Come back when you're ready to speak to us with respect." Michael left, but he didn't come back alone. The next 6 weeks had been a slow siege. Jennifer called every other day, sometimes crying, sometimes angry, always circling back to the same point: the house, the land, the unfairness of leaving them in the dark about their future. Thomas showed up twice, looking uncomfortable, saying things Harold suspected Michael had scripted for him. "It's for your own good. You don't understand how complicated estates get. We're trying to protect you." But Harold had worked in manufacturing for 3 decades. He understood power dynamics. He understood when someone was trying to take something from you and calling it a gift. He also understood what his children weren't saying. They were worried about the inheritance. Not about him and Dorothy, about the money the house would bring when Harold and Dorothy were gone. And they wanted to secure that money now, before anything could threaten it. Medical bills, long-term care, the unpredictable costs of aging. They weren't thinking about their parents. They were thinking about themselves. The final confrontation came on a Thursday morning. All 3 children arrived together, which should have been a warning. They came with more papers, more arguments, and this time, they weren't asking. "We've consulted an attorney," Michael said. "There are ways to declare someone incompetent if they're making decisions that endanger their assets. Is that what you want? To be dragged through court? To have strangers deciding what happens to you? Are you threatening us?" Harold asked. "I'm protecting you from yourselves." Dorothy stood up from her chair. 71 years old, 5'3", 120 pounds after a good meal. But she stood like she was made of iron. "Get out of my house," she said. "All of you, right now." "Mom, don't you mom me. I fed you from my own body. I walked floors with you when you had nightmares. I gave you everything I had, and I never asked for anything back. And this is how you repay me? By coming into my home and threatening me? Get out. Don't come back until you remember who you're talking to." That's when Michael grabbed her arm. Harold would never forget the sound she made, a small cry of surprise and pain as Michael's fingers dug into her bicep, yanking her toward him. "You don't get to dismiss us," Michael hissed. "Not after everything we've not." Harold moved without thinking. 31 years of factory work had kept him stronger than he looked, and he shoved his son away from his wife with both hands, sending Michael stumbling backward. "Don't you touch her," Harold said. What happened next was a blur. Thomas Sweet, drifting Thomas, who had never raised his voice, lunged at Harold from behind. Jennifer was screaming something. Michael regained his balance and came back swinging, his fist connecting with the side of his father's head. Harold went down. Dorothy threw herself over him, trying to protect him, and someone, he still didn't know who, kicked her in the ribs. The sounds they made, the sounds his wife made, Harold would hear them forever. When it was over, when the violence had spent itself and the children stood panting in the living room of the house where they'd grown up, Michael made a decision. "Get them in the car," he said. "Michael, we can't just get them in the car now." Harold was too dazed to resist. Dorothy was crying, clutching her side where the kick had landed. They were lifted, dragged, pushed into the back seat of Michael's SUV like cargo. No one spoke during the drive. Harold watched familiar landmarks pass through the window. The gas station where he'd taught Michael to pump gas. The school where Jennifer had starred in the 4th grade play. The church where they'd all been baptized. Then they were on the highway, heading south, away from everything they knew. Michael drove for 20 minutes before pulling onto the shoulder of Highway 44, a stretch of nothing between two small towns, farmland on both sides but no houses visible, no businesses, no help. "Get out," he said. "Michael, I said get out." Harold helped Dorothy from the car. They stood on the gravel shoulder, swaying, bleeding, not understanding. "Your purse," Harold said to Dorothy. "Your phone." "Already took them," Michael said. "You want to call the police? Go ahead, find a phone. Tell them your story. See who believes you." He looked at his father, and Harold saw something in his son's eyes he'd never seen before. Not anger, not hatred, but something worse. Contempt. "You had a chance to do this the easy way," Michael said. "You chose to make it hard. So now we do it the hard way. Good luck getting home, Dad, if you even make it." The SUV pulled away. Harold and Dorothy stood on the side of the highway, watching their children drive into the distance, and understood that they were completely, utterly alone. That was this morning, 9 hours ago. 9 hours of walking under a sun that showed no mercy. 9 hours of watching cars pass, some slowing, most not, none stopping. 9 hours of holding each other upright, saying the same things over and over. Someone will help, someone will stop, just a little further, until the words lost all meaning and became just sounds, vibrations in the hot air. Dorothy stumbled, and Harold caught her, but the motion sent fire through his lower back. He gasped, nearly went down himself, managed to steady them both through pure will. "Need to rest," Dorothy whispered, the first words she'd spoken in over an hour. "I know, sweetheart. Just a little further. There's shade up ahead." There wasn't. He was lying, but he couldn't stop moving, because if they stopped, he wasn't sure they'd start again. Another car approached from behind. Harold didn't turn this time, didn't wave. What was the point? He'd counted 19 vehicles since the SUV drove away. 19 chances for someone to show basic human decency. 19 people who'd chosen not to get involved, not to slow down, not to let someone else's crisis interrupt their day. This is who we are now, Harold thought bitterly. This is what we've become. A society where two old people can be beaten and dumped on the highway. The sound of an engine changed, not passing, slowing. Harold turned, and for a moment the sun blinded him, and all he could see was a massive shape, a dark silhouette against the glare. A truck, an 18-wheeler, the kind that moved the world's goods from place to place, driven by people who lived on the road, who had schedules and deadlines, and lives that didn't include stopping for strangers. The truck was pulling onto the shoulder. The air brakes hissed like a dragon settling down to rest. Harold felt Dorothy's hand tighten in his, and he didn't know if it was hope or fear, but it was something, and something was more than they'd had for hours. The driver's door opened. A man stepped down from the cab, and everything was about to change. Marcus Cole had been driving trucks for 22 years. In that time, he'd crossed the country more times than he could count, watched the sun rise over the Atlantic and set over the Pacific, seen every kind of weather and every kind of road. He'd hauled furniture, produce, machinery, and once, memorably, a trailer full of live chickens that escaped when a latch failed somewhere outside of Memphis. He'd driven through blizzards that turned the world white, and dust storms that turned it orange, and rainstorms so heavy he'd had to pull over and wait because he couldn't see the hood of his own truck. He'd seen a lot of things on the side of the road, too. Broken down cars, scattered debris from accidents, animals that hadn't made it across. Once, outside of Tulsa, a wedding dress hanging from a guardrail, still in its plastic covering, and he'd wondered about that story for years. But he'd never seen anything like this. Two elderly people, holding each other up, walking along the highway like refugees from some disaster. The woman's face was bruised so badly that even from a distance, Marcus could see the damage. The man moved like every step cost him something precious. Their clothes were dirty, torn in places, and they walked with the desperate determination of people who had no other choice. Marcus almost kept driving. He was behind schedule already. A delay at the distribution center in Springfield had cost him 3 hours, and his delivery in Carbondale was due by 8 p.m. If he stopped, if he got involved in whatever this was, he'd miss the window. The receiving dock would be closed. He'd have to wait until morning, which meant lost money, an angry dispatcher, and another black mark on a record that was already carrying too many. His foot eased off the accelerator, but he didn't brake, not yet. Someone else will stop, he told himself. Someone with time, someone local, someone who knows how to handle whatever this is. But even as he thought it, he knew it was a lie, because 19 other drivers had probably thought the same thing. Marcus watched in his side mirror as the elderly couple grew smaller, and something his mother used to say came back to him, clear as if she were sitting in the passenger seat. The measure of a man isn't what he does when it's convenient. It's what he does when it costs him something. His mother had been gone for 6 years now. Cancer. He'd been on the road when she passed, racing back from a delivery in Nevada, and he'd missed her by 47 minutes. 47 minutes. He'd spent every day since then wondering what he would have said if he'd made it in time, what she would have said to him, whether she knew how much he loved her. He thought about his mother. He thought about those two people, walking in the heat, clearly hurt, clearly in trouble. And he hit the brakes. The truck shuddered to a stop on the shoulder, gravel crunching under 18 wheels. Marcus set the parking brake, grabbed his phone from the dash, and climbed down from the cab. The heat hit him like a physical force. It had to be over 90 degrees, and these two had been walking in it. For how long? He didn't want to think about it. He approached slowly, keeping his hands visible, not wanting to spook them. They'd stopped walking when his truck pulled over, and now they stood watching him with a wariness that made his chest ache. They were afraid of him. After everything they'd clearly been through, they were still capable of fear. "Hey," Marcus said, keeping his voice gentle. "My name's Marcus. Marcus Cole. I'm not going to hurt you. Are you folks okay?" It was a stupid question. They were obviously not okay, but he didn't know what else to say. The old man spoke first. His voice was hoarse, cracked from thirst and dust. "We need help. I can see that. What happened to you?" The man and woman exchanged a look. Something passed between them, a whole conversation in a single glance, the kind of communication that only comes from decades of marriage. Then the woman turned away, and Marcus saw her shoulders shake. "It's a long story," the man said. "I've got time. You're a truck driver. You've got a schedule." Marcus shrugged. "Schedule can wait. You two look like you're about to collapse. When's the last time you had water? Food?" The man's silence was enough. "Come on," Marcus said, gesturing toward his truck. "I've got water in the cab, some snacks. Let's get you out of this sun, and you can tell me what's going on." The man hesitated. His wife still hadn't turned around. "Please," Marcus said. "Whatever happened, you don't have to face it alone. Let me help." Something in the old man's face crumpled, just for a moment, just a flicker, and Marcus saw the exhaustion beneath the stoic surface. This was a man who had been strong for someone else for hours, maybe longer, and he was running on fumes. "Okay," the man said. "Okay, thank you." Getting them into the cab was a process. Marcus's truck was a Peterbilt 579, and the cab sat high off the ground. For a healthy person, the climb was manageable. For two injured, exhausted seniors, it was a mountain. Marcus ended up half lifting the woman, Dorothy, her husband called her, while her husband Harold pushed from below, and by the time they were all inside, everyone was breathing hard. The cab was cramped with 3 people, but it was air-conditioned. Marcus cranked it up, and Dorothy made a sound that was almost a sob as the cool air hit her damaged face. "Here." Marcus passed them each a bottle of water from the cooler he kept behind the seats. "Drink slow. You're probably dehydrated." They drank. Harold's hands shook so badly he nearly dropped the bottle. Dorothy held hers with both hands, like something precious. Marcus watched them, and the anger that had been building since he first saw them started to crystallize into something harder. Someone had done this to them. Two people in their 70s, clearly gentle, clearly kind. Someone had beaten them and left them on the highway like garbage. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked. Harold looked at Dorothy. She nodded, still not meeting Marcus's eyes. And Harold started talking. It took almost 20 minutes for the whole story to come out. Harold told it plainly, without dramatics, but Marcus could hear the pain beneath every word. The house, the children, the demands for the deed, the threats. The visit turned into a confrontation, the violence. When Harold described Michael grabbing Dorothy's arm, Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel, even though the truck wasn't moving. When he described being kicked while his wife tried to protect him, Marcus had to look away. "They drove us out here," Harold finished. "Took our phones, our wallets, everything. Left us on the side of the road and drove away. That was this morning. We've been walking ever since." "How long?" 9 hours. Maybe more. I lost track. Marcus did the math. 9 hours of walking in this heat. At their age, with those injuries. It was a miracle they were still alive. "Have any other cars stopped?" he asked. Harold's jaw tightened. 19, we counted. 19 cars slowed down or saw us. None of them stopped. 19. Marcus thought about all the times he'd driven past something and told himself it wasn't his problem. All the times he'd been too busy, too tired, too focused on his own life to notice someone else's suffering. He'd never beaten anyone, never abandoned anyone on a highway, but he'd looked away. Everyone had looked away. Not today. "Okay," Marcus said. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm taking you to a hospital. Those injuries need to be looked at by a professional. You might have broken bones, internal bleeding, who knows what else. Then we're going to the police." "The police won't believe us," Dorothy said. It was the first time she'd spoken directly to him, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "They're our children. Who's going to believe that our own children did this?" "I believe you," Marcus said simply. "And if the police don't, we'll make them believe. We'll document everything. Your injuries, your story, all of it. We'll take pictures. We'll get medical records. We'll build a case so solid that no one can look away." "Why?" Harold asked. "Why what? Why are you doing this? You don't know us. You've got your own life, your own problems. Why stop? Why get involved?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. Through the windshield, he could see the highway stretching into the distance, shimmering with heat. Somewhere out there, Harold and Dorothy's children were going about their day, probably already convincing themselves that what they'd done was justified, necessary, the right thing. "Because I wasn't there when my mother needed me," Marcus said finally. "I was on the road, chasing a delivery, and she died alone. I've spent 6 years wishing I'd made a different choice. Today, I'm making one." He looked at them, met Harold's eyes, then Dorothy's. "I'm not going to let you be alone in this. Whatever happens next, you've got someone in your corner. That's a promise." Dorothy's hand found Harold's. Tears were streaming down her face now, cutting clean tracks through the dust and dried blood. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Marcus said, putting the truck in gear. "We've got work to do." The nearest hospital was 32 miles away, in a town called Clearwater that Marcus had driven through 100 times without ever really seeing. It had a gas station, a diner, a feed store, and a small regional medical center that served the surrounding farm communities. Marcus pulled his rig into the hospital parking lot, taking up 4 spaces, and helped Harold and Dorothy down from the cab. A security guard approached, looking annoyed, but when he saw the state of the elderly couple, his expression changed. "What happened to them?" "They were assaulted," Marcus said. "They need help." After that, things moved quickly. Medical staff appeared with wheelchairs. Questions were asked. Names, dates of birth, allergies, insurance information. Harold and Dorothy had none of their documents, their wallets having been taken, but the hospital staff didn't hesitate. They took the couple back into the emergency department, and Marcus was left standing in the waiting room, his truck illegally parked outside, his delivery deadline long since passed. He called his dispatcher. "Marcus, Where the hell are you? Carbondale is losing their minds. I'm not going to make the delivery tonight. What do you mean you're not going to? I found 2 people on the highway, beaten, abandoned, elderly. I'm at a hospital in Clearwater. There was a pause. That's not your problem, Marcus. You've got a contract. It is my problem. I'm making it my problem. Send someone else to Carbondale, or reschedule the delivery. I don't care which, but I'm not leaving these people. If you do this, there are going to be consequences. You understand that? I understand. Your job. It's just a job. This is life. 2 lives. I'll deal with the consequences when I deal with them. He hung up before his dispatcher could respond. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline, from the knowledge that he'd just put his career on the line for 2 strangers he'd met an hour ago. It felt right. For the first time in years, something felt right. Marcus waited in the hospital for 4 hours. He bought coffee from a vending machine, drank it without tasting it, and bought another one. He called his sister in Chicago to let her know he'd be delayed, gave her a brief version of what happened, and listened to her alternate between praise and concern. He watched the news on the waiting room television, something about politics, something about the economy, nothing about 2 elderly people being abandoned by their children. Finally, a doctor came out. Her name was Dr. Patel, and she was maybe 40, with tired eyes and a calm voice that suggested she'd seen too much to be surprised by anything. You're with the Mercers? Yes, ma'am. Are you family? No, I'm the one who found them. Dr. Patel studied him for a moment, then nodded. They asked me to talk to you, said you might be the only person they trust right now. That hit Marcus harder than he expected. How are they? He asked. They'll live, but it's not good. Mr. Mercer has 2 cracked ribs, a mild concussion, and severe bruising across his back and sides. Mrs. Mercer has a fractured cheekbone, 3 bruised ribs, and what appears to be a minor internal hemorrhage in her left kidney. We're monitoring it, but it may require intervention. Both are severely dehydrated and showing signs of heat exhaustion. Marcus closed his eyes. Someone did this to them. Yes, someone did, and I've already contacted the police. The police arrived an hour later. There were 2 of them, a middle-aged officer named Reynolds and a younger one named Chen, who took notes while Reynolds asked questions. They interviewed Harold and Dorothy separately, then together, then asked Marcus what he'd seen when he found them. Marcus told them everything. The highway, the heat, the couple walking like survivors of some disaster, the 19 cars that had passed without stopping, the story Harold had told him about their children. The children's names? Reynolds asked. Michael Mercer, Harold said. He'd been moved to a regular room, Dorothy in the bed beside him, an IV in her arm, and monitors beeping softly. Jennifer Mercer Holt, Thomas Mercer, they're my kids. Reynolds wrote down the names. And you're saying they assaulted you, took your belongings, and abandoned you on Highway 44? Yes. Do you have any evidence of this? Witnesses? Security footage? No, they made sure of that. It happened in our own home. Chen and Reynolds exchanged a look that Marcus didn't like. Mr. Mercer, Reynolds said carefully, I have to be honest with you. Cases like this, they're complicated. Adult children and elderly parents, disputes over property, without physical evidence or witnesses, it often becomes a he said, she said situation. And frankly, the courts tend to be skeptical of parents who accuse their children of violence. What are you saying? Dorothy asked. You don't believe us? I'm not saying that. I'm saying that pursuing this through the legal system is going to be difficult. Your children will have their own version of events. They'll say it was a mutual altercation, or that you attacked them first, or that your injuries came from somewhere else. Without proof, the proof is right there, Marcus cut in, pointing at Dorothy's face. Look at her. Look at what they did. You think she punched herself? You think a 71-year-old woman with a fractured cheekbone is making this up? Sir, I understand you're upset. You're damn right I'm upset. These people were beaten by their own children and left to die on a highway, and you're already talking about how hard it's going to be to get justice? What kind of system is this? Reynolds' face hardened. It's the system we've got. I didn't make the rules. I'm trying to explain reality. Then change reality. Do your job. Investigate. Go to their house. Look for evidence of the fight. Check the children's phone records, their GPS data. Something will prove they were there. Something will prove what happened. Reynolds studied Marcus for a long moment. You're awfully invested in this for a stranger. I'm a decent human being, Marcus said. That used to be normal. The room fell silent. Chen had stopped writing. Dorothy was crying again. Harold stared at the ceiling, his face a mask of exhaustion and defeat. Finally, Reynolds nodded slowly. We'll investigate. I'm not promising anything, but we'll look into it. You have my word. Thank you, Harold said quietly. But Marcus could hear what Harold wasn't saying. Thank you, but I don't believe you. Thank you, but I've learned today what promises are worth. Thank you, but I'm too tired to hope. That night, after the police left and the hospital settled into its quiet nighttime rhythm, Marcus sat in a chair between the two beds. He should have left. He'd done what he could, found them, brought them to safety, and talked to the police. He had no obligation to stay. His truck was still in the parking lot. His delivery was still undelivered. His job was still hanging by a thread. But when Dorothy reached out her hand, searching in the dim light, he took it. You're still here, she whispered. Where else would I be? You should go. You have your own life. My life will still be there tomorrow. Right now you need someone to stay. Dorothy's grip tightened on his fingers. Our children, she said, and her voice broke. Our own children, Marcus. We gave them everything. We loved them so much. How did they become this? Marcus didn't have an answer. He didn't think there was one. Not really. Some questions weren't meant to be answered. They were just meant to be endured. I don't know, he said honestly. But I know this. Whatever they become, it's not about you. You didn't fail them. They failed you. And that's not your burden to carry. It feels like our burden, Harold said from the other bed. It feels like everything we did wrong, every mistake we made, it all led to that moment, to them throwing us away. You didn't do anything wrong. Some people they break in ways we can't predict. They choose selfishness over love, greed over gratitude. That's not your fault. That's theirs. The room was quiet, except for the soft beeping of monitors and the distant sound of footsteps in the hallway. Will you stay? Dorothy asked. Just for tonight. I know it's too much to ask. It's not too much, Marcus said. I'll stay. And he did. He stayed through the night, sleeping fitfully in the chair, waking whenever a nurse came to check vitals. He stayed through the morning when the doctor came with updates about Dorothy's kidney stable, no intervention needed, and Harold's concussion improving, no signs of bleeding. He stayed through the afternoon, when a social worker arrived to discuss options and resources. He stayed because someone needed to. He stayed because 22 years of driving past other people's problems had taught him that the only way to live with yourself was to sometimes stop. He stayed because Harold and Dorothy Mercer, after 48 years of marriage and a lifetime of giving, deserved to have someone choose them. And somewhere in those hours of staying, Marcus made a decision. He wasn't just going to help them through this crisis. He was going to help them fight. 3 days after Marcus Cole pulled his truck onto the shoulder of Highway 44, he was still in Clearwater. His dispatcher had called 4 more times, each call angrier than the last. The company had sent another driver to complete the Carbondale delivery, but Marcus was officially on unpaid suspension pending a review of his abandonment of cargo. His sister had wired him money for a motel room. His savings account, never robust to begin with, was draining slowly but steadily. None of it mattered. What mattered was the small conference room in the Clearwater Police Department, where Marcus sat beside Harold and Dorothy Mercer, across the table from Officer Reynolds and a woman named Detective Sarah Hutchins, who had been assigned to investigate their case. Detective Hutchins was in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun and reading glasses perched on her nose. She had a folder open in front of her, and she'd been studying its contents for several minutes without speaking. Well? Marcus finally asked. What did you find? Hutchins looked up. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Marcus had learned to read people over 22 years of dealing with warehouse managers, dispatchers, and highway patrol officers. There was something in her eyes. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. We found quite a bit, actually, she said. Mr. Cole, your suggestion about checking GPS data was a good one. Michael Mercer drives a 2021 Lincoln Navigator with a built-in tracking system. The dealership was able to provide us with location data for the day in question. She pulled a printout from the folder and slid it across the table. According to this, Michael Mercer's vehicle was at your address. She nodded at Harold. For approximately 47 minutes on Thursday morning. It then traveled south on Highway 44, stopped briefly at the location where you were found, and continued to the Mercer residence in Clayton. The timeline matches your account exactly. Harold's hand found Dorothy's under the table. So you believe us? The data supports your story. Yes, but there's more. Hutchins pulled out another document. We obtained a warrant to search Michael Mercer's home. We found Mrs. Mercer's purse in a closet, along with Mr. Mercer's wallet. Both contained their identification, credit cards, and approximately $300 in cash. We also found Mr. Mercer's cell phone, which had been powered off but not destroyed. They kept everything? Dorothy asked, her voice small. It appears so. Perhaps they intended to dispose of the items later, or perhaps they simply didn't think anyone would come looking. Hutchins paused. We also found something else. A document, prepared by an attorney, that would have transferred the deed to your property to your 3 children. It was unsigned, but it had been printed the day before the assault. Marcus leaned forward. So this was premeditated. They planned this. That's our assessment. The district attorney is reviewing the evidence now, but I expect charges to be filed within the week. Assault, battery, elder abuse, abandonment of a vulnerable adult, and possibly attempted murder, given the circumstances of leaving 2 injured elderly people on a highway in extreme heat. The room fell silent. Harold was staring at the printout showing his son's GPS data, tracing the route with his finger. From their home to the highway, from the highway to Clayton, a map of betrayal, rendered in coordinates and timestamps. Attempted murder, he said quietly. Our son could go to prison for attempted murder. If convicted, yes. All 3 of your children could face significant prison time. Dorothy made a sound, not quite a sob, not quite a laugh, something broken and bitter and lost. We just wanted them to leave us alone, she said. We just wanted to live our lives in peace. We never wanted this. Hutchins removed her glasses and looked at Dorothy with something like compassion. Mrs. Mercer, I've been doing this job for 23 years. I've seen a lot of cases involving families, disputes over money, property, inheritance, and I want to tell you something that most people don't understand. She leaned forward slightly. You didn't cause this. Whatever choices your children made, they made them as adults. They had options. They could have walked away, accepted your decision, respected your autonomy. Instead, they chose violence. That choice was theirs, and the consequences are theirs. Not yours. But if we had just signed the papers, then what? They would have controlled your home. They could have evicted you, sold the property out from under you, left you with nothing. You said no because you had a right to say no. What happened after that is on them. Dorothy didn't respond, but some of the tension in her shoulders seemed to ease just slightly. The charges were filed on a Tuesday. Michael Mercer was arrested at his office, a financial planning firm in Clayton where he'd worked for 15 years. Jennifer Mercer Holt was arrested at her home. Thomas Mercer was arrested at a bar where he'd apparently been drinking since Thursday, probably trying to drown whatever conscience he had left. The news spread quickly. Small towns have long memories and efficient gossip networks, and by Wednesday morning, everyone in Clearwater and the surrounding communities knew the story. An elderly couple, attacked by their own children, left to die on the highway. A truck driver who stopped when no one else would. The first casserole arrived at the hospital that afternoon. It was brought by a woman named Gladys Pemberton, who was 82 years old and had known Dorothy's mother 50 years ago. She carried a dish of chicken and rice, still warm, and a card signed by the members of her church's women's auxiliary. We heard what happened, she said, setting the casserole on Dorothy's bedside table. We wanted you to know you're not alone. After Gladys came others. A retired teacher who remembered Harold from the factory, back when the teacher's husband had worked the same shift. A young mother whose car Harold had helped fix on the side of the road 3 years ago. The owner of a feed store who had done business with the Mercer family for decades and couldn't believe what the children had become. They brought food, they brought flowers, they brought prayers and well wishes, and the simple, powerful gift of presence. By the end of the week, Harold and Dorothy's hospital room looked like a florist shop, and the nursing staff had started keeping the overflow casseroles in a break room refrigerator. I don't understand, Dorothy said one evening, looking at the cards that covered every available surface. We didn't know all these people. Why do they care? Marcus, who had taken to spending most of his days in their room between trips to the motel and the police station, smiled. "Because people are better than we think," he said. "Most of the time, anyway. We get so focused on the ones who hurt us that we forget about all the others. The ones who show up, the ones who bring casseroles, the ones who stop their trucks on the highway," Harold added quietly. Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with the implication. "I just did what anyone should do." "But no one did," Dorothy said. 19 people drove past us. You stopped. That's not nothing, Marcus. That's everything." On Friday, Harold was discharged from the hospital. Dorothy needed a few more days. Her kidney was healing well, but the doctors wanted to monitor her closely, so Harold faced a decision. He couldn't go home. His home was a crime scene, and even if it hadn't been, he couldn't imagine walking through those rooms alone. Not after what happened there. Marcus solved the problem. "There's a motel about a mile from here," he said. "The Pine Rest. It's not fancy, but it's clean, and the owner's a good guy. I'll get you a room next to mine. You can visit Dorothy during the day and rest at night." "Marcus, you've already done too much. Let me decide what's too much. Right now, you need somewhere to sleep that isn't a hospital chair." End of discussion. Harold wanted to argue. He'd spent his whole life being the one who took care of others, who solved problems, who handled things. Accepting help, especially this much help, from a stranger who owed him nothing, went against every instinct he had. But he was tired. And something about Marcus made it easier to accept. Maybe it was the way he offered help, matter of fact and without ceremony, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Maybe it was the way he never made Harold feel like a burden or a charity case. Or maybe it was simply that Harold had run out of strength to resist. "Okay," he said. "Thank you." The Pine Rest Motor Lodge was exactly what Marcus had described. Not fancy, but clean. It was a single-story building shaped like an L, with maybe 20 rooms and a small office where the owner, a broad-shouldered man in his 60s named George, handed over keys and asked no questions. Marcus's room was 7. Harold's was 8. That first night, Harold lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the highway in the distance. Every passing truck made him flinch. Every set of headlights sweeping across the curtains made his heart race. He thought about Dorothy, alone in the hospital. He thought about his children, in jail, waiting for arraignment. He thought about 48 years of marriage, 31 years at the factory, a lifetime of trying to do the right thing, and how it had all led to this. A motel room, a borrowed truck driver, and the wreckage of everything he'd built. There was a knock at the door. Harold tensed. It was after 10. "It's Marcus." Harold let out a breath and opened the door. Marcus stood in the yellow glow of the exterior lights, holding 2 bottles of beer. "Thought you might not be able to sleep," Marcus said. "Want some company?" They sat in the plastic chairs outside Harold's room, drinking beer that neither of them particularly wanted, watching the occasional car pass on the highway. "Can I ask you something?" Harold said eventually. "Sure. What happened to your mother?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. The beer bottle turned slowly in his hands. "She had cancer," he said. "Diagnosed about 3 years before she passed. It was slow at first. She had good months, bad months. The doctors kept saying there was hope, and I believed them because I wanted to believe them." He took a long drink. "I kept working, kept driving, told myself I needed the money, needed to keep my life together, needed to be practical." She understood. She always understood. That was the thing about Mom. She never asked for anything, never complained, just accepted whatever I could give her. When did she pass? 6 years ago, March. I was in Nevada when I got the call that she'd taken a turn. I drove for 20 hours straight, didn't stop except for gas, and I still missed her by 47 minutes. Harold didn't say anything. What was there to say? The last thing she said to my sister, the last coherent thing, was, "Tell Marcus I know he tried." That's it. I know he tried. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "I didn't try hard enough. I told myself I was being responsible. But really I was just scared. Scared of watching her die. Scared of being there when it happened. So I found excuses to be somewhere else." "You were young." "I was 31. Old enough to know better." The highway hummed in the distance. A dog barked somewhere in the darkness. "Is that why you stopped for us?" Harold asked. "Because of your mother?" "Partly. When I saw you and Dorothy on that highway, I don't know. Something just clicked, like the universe was giving me a chance to do what I should have done before. To be present when someone needed me, Marcus shrugged. Sounds crazy, probably. It doesn't sound crazy. It sounds human. Yeah, well, human is harder than it should be. They finished their beers in silence. When Marcus finally stood to go back to his room, Harold reached out and gripped his arm. Thank you, Harold said. I know you don't want me to keep saying it, but thank you. Not just for stopping, for staying. Marcus nodded, his throat tight. Get some sleep, Harold. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. The arraignment was on Monday. Harold and Dorothy, who had been discharged on Sunday with strict instructions for rest and follow-up appointments, attended together. They sat in the second row of the courthouse gallery, holding hands, watching as their 3 children were brought in wearing orange jumpsuits. Marcus sat beside them. Michael looked smaller than Harold remembered. His expensive suit had been replaced by jail-issue clothing, his confident posture replaced by the hunched shoulders of a man facing consequences he hadn't anticipated. Jennifer kept her head down, refusing to look at anyone. Thomas, surprisingly, met his father's eyes once, just for a moment, before looking away. The charges were read: assault in the first degree, battery, elder abuse, criminal abandonment. For Michael, an additional charge of orchestrating the incident. Bail was set. Michael's attorney requested release on his own recognizance, citing his client's standing in the community, his business, his family. The prosecutor objected, noting the severity of the charges and the deliberate nature of the crime. The judge set bail at $Math BB Fi $200, $0 for Michael, $Math BB Fi $150, $0 for Jennifer, Math BB Fi $100, $0 for Thomas. Can they pay that? Dorothy whispered to Marcus. I don't know. Depends on how much they have, how much their friends and family will contribute. As it turned out, Michael could pay. His wife posted bail that afternoon, using the equity in their home. Jennifer's ex-husband, a man she'd divorced 3 years earlier, refused to help, but her friends pooled resources to secure a bond. Thomas had no one. He remained in jail, unable to raise even 10% of his bail amount. Harold watched his youngest son being led back to the holding area and felt something he hadn't expected: pity. Thomas had always been the weak one, the follower. Whatever terrible thing he'd participated in, Harold suspected it wasn't his idea. That didn't excuse it. Nothing could excuse what they'd done, but it explained something. Thomas had been swept along by his older siblings his whole life. This was just the most devastating example. Are you okay? Marcus asked as they left the courthouse. No, Harold said honestly, but I'm not sure I'll ever be okay again. I'm just learning to live with that. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, medical appointments, and small acts of kindness from strangers. The community of Clearwater had adopted Harold and Dorothy as their own. George at the Pine Rest refused to accept payment for their room, saying it was the least he could do. A local attorney named Patricia Chen took their case pro bono, helping them navigate the criminal proceedings and begin the process of securing their property from their children's claims. A church group organized a meal train, ensuring they had hot food every evening. Marcus stayed. He'd lost his job, officially terminated for failure to complete assigned duties, but he didn't seem to care. He found part-time work at a local auto shop, using skills he'd picked up from years of maintaining his own truck. He split his time between working, helping Harold and Dorothy with errands and appointments, and making sure they were never alone. You're putting your life on hold for us, Dorothy said one afternoon as Marcus drove them back from a meeting with Patricia Chen. You shouldn't be doing this. You have your own future to think about. This is my future, Marcus said, at least for now. When you're back on your feet, I'll figure out what's next. But right now, this is where I'm supposed to be. How do you know? Marcus smiled. Because it's the first time in 6 years that I've felt like I'm exactly where I should be. In late September, almost 2 months after the assault, Harold and Dorothy went home. The police had released the scene weeks earlier, but neither of them had been ready to return. The house held too many memories, good and bad, and the thought of walking through those rooms, past the place where their children had attacked them, felt impossible. But the house was theirs. They'd built it, paid for it, filled it with a lifetime of love. They weren't going to let their children take that from them too. Marcus drove them. He'd borrowed a pickup truck from the auto shop, and the 3 of them sat in the cab as the familiar landscape rolled past. The gas station, the school, the church, all the landmarks of Harold and Dorothy's life. When they pulled into the driveway, Dorothy began to cry. "It's okay," Harold said, squeezing her hand. "We don't have to go in right away." "It's not that," Dorothy said. "Look." Harold looked. The yard had been mowed. The garden, which should have been overgrown after 2 months of neglect, had been weeded and tended. The porch steps, which had creaked for years, looked new. And hanging from the front door was a banner, hand-painted in bright colors. "Welcome home, Harold and Dorothy." "What?" Harold couldn't finish the sentence. Marcus was grinning. "Surprise. The community organized a workday while you were recovering. They wanted you to come home to something beautiful." Harold got out of the truck, his legs unsteady. He walked toward the house like a man in a dream, taking in the details he'd missed at first glance. The rose bushes had been pruned. The apple trees had been harvested, the fruit probably distributed to whoever wanted it. Someone had painted the mailbox. The front door opened. George from the Pine Rest stepped out, followed by Gladys Pemberton, Patricia Chen, and a dozen other people Harold recognized from the past 2 months. They gathered on the porch, smiling, some of them crying. "Welcome home," George said. Harold couldn't speak. Neither could Dorothy. They stood in their driveway, surrounded by people who had been strangers 2 months ago, and wept. That night, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet, Harold and Dorothy sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Marcus sat with them. He'd turned down the offer of a guest room, saying he'd head back to the motel, but he hadn't left yet. Some part of him, Harold suspected, wasn't ready to leave them alone. Not yet. "It's strange," Dorothy said softly. "This house used to feel so full. 5 children running through the rooms, holidays with everyone gathered around the table. Now it's just us, and it feels empty." "But not lonely," Harold said. "Not anymore." He looked at Marcus. "You've given us something our own children never did," Harold said. "Not just help, though God knows you've helped us. You've given us dignity. You treated us like we mattered when everyone else, even the people who were supposed to love us, treated us like we were disposable." "You do matter," Marcus said simply. "Everyone matters. That's the thing people forget. You get so wrapped up in your own life, your own problems, that you stop seeing the people around you. But they're all there. They're all fighting battles you know nothing about. And sometimes, all it takes to change someone's life is to stop and really see them." Dorothy reached over and took Marcus's hand. "You saw us?" she said. "Yeah," Marcus said. "I did." The sun slipped below the horizon. The first stars appeared. And in the quiet of the evening, 3 people who had been strangers sat together on a porch, bound by something stronger than blood, the simple, profound act of choosing to care. The trial began in November. The leaves had turned and fallen, carpeting the ground in shades of amber and rust, and the first hints of winter sharpened the morning air. Harold and Dorothy drove to the courthouse each day with Marcus, who had become such a fixture in their lives that his absence would have felt stranger than his presence. The prosecution's case was strong. GPS data, the recovered belongings, medical records documenting injuries consistent with assault, testimony from the hospital staff, the police, and Marcus himself. The district attorney, a determined woman named Rebecca Torres, laid out the evidence methodically, painting a picture of premeditation and cruelty that made even the jury members shift uncomfortably in their seats. The defense tried various strategies. Michael's attorney argued that the confrontation had been mutual, that Harold had attacked first, that the children were merely defending themselves. The GPS data, he suggested, only proved that Michael had been at the property, not what had happened there. The injuries could have occurred during a fall, an accident, anything. But then the prosecution called Dorothy to the stand. She walked slowly to the witness box, her face still bearing faint traces of bruising even 2 months later. She sat down, adjusted the microphone, and looked directly at the jury. "Mrs. Mercer," Rebecca Torres said, "can you tell us what happened on the morning of August 14th? Dorothy told them. She spoke quietly, without drama, describing the years of sacrifice and the weeks of pressure, the demands for the deed, the threats. The moment Michael grabbed her arm, the chaos that followed, being loaded into the car like cargo, being dumped on the highway like trash. When you were left on the side of the road, Torres asked, "What did you think would happen?" Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "I thought we would die," she said. "I'm 71 years old. My husband is 73. It was over 90 degrees. We had no water, no phone, no way to call for help. We walked for 9 hours. 19 cars passed us without stopping. She paused. I thought my children had killed us. I thought that was how our story would end. 2 old people, found dead on a highway, and no one would ever know why. But that's not what happened. No, a man stopped, a stranger, a truck driver who had every reason to keep going but chose not to. Dorothy's eyes found Marcus in the gallery. He saved our lives. He's been saving us ever since. The courtroom was silent. Mrs. Mercer, Torres said gently, do you see the people who did this to you in this courtroom? Dorothy turned to look at the defense table, where her 3 children sat in a row. Michael stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. Jennifer had her head down, tears dripping onto the table. Thomas met his mother's eyes, and in his face she saw something she hadn't expected. Shame. Yes, Dorothy said. I see them. I raised them. I loved them. And they tried to kill me for a piece of property. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Harold and Dorothy waited in a small room adjacent to the courtroom, drinking coffee they didn't taste, holding hands across the table. Marcus sat with them, as he always did now, a steady presence in a world that had become fundamentally unsteady. Whatever happens, Harold said, I want you both to know something. Dorothy and Marcus looked at him. These past few months have been the worst of my life. Losing my children, not to death, but to something worse, has broken something in me that I don't think will ever heal. But they've also shown me something I'd forgotten. He looked at Marcus. Family isn't just blood. It's not just the people you're obligated to love because of genetics or history. Family is the people who show up, the people who stay, the people who choose you, even when it costs them something. His voice wavered. You chose us, Marcus. You didn't have to. You had every reason not to. But you stopped your truck, and you stayed, and you fought for us when our own children wouldn't. Harold, let me finish. Whatever the jury decides, whatever happens to Michael and Jennifer and Thomas, I want you to know that you've given us something more valuable than justice. You've given us hope. Hope that the world isn't as broken as it sometimes seems. Hope that kindness still exists, even in the darkest moments. Hope that we matter, even when the people who should have loved us decided we didn't. Marcus couldn't speak. His throat was too tight, his eyes too full. Dorothy reached across the table and took his hand. You're our family now, she said simply. If you'll have us. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. The door opened. A bailiff stepped in. The jury has reached a verdict. Guilty. All 3 children. Guilty on all counts. Michael Mercer, guilty of assault in the 1st degree, battery, elder abuse, criminal abandonment, and orchestrating the assault. Sentenced to 15 years in state prison, with possibility of parole after 10. Jennifer Mercer Holt, guilty of assault, battery, elder abuse, and criminal abandonment. Sentenced to 8 years, with possibility of parole after 5. Thomas Mercer, guilty of assault, battery, elder abuse, and criminal abandonment. Sentenced to 6 years, with possibility of parole after 3. When the verdicts were read, Jennifer collapsed into sobs. Michael sat rigid, his face a mask of disbelief, as if he still couldn't comprehend how his plan had failed so completely. Thomas closed his eyes and let out a long breath, and Harold hoped that it might have been relief. The judge addressed Harold and Dorothy before adjourning. Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, what happened to you represents a profound betrayal of the most sacred bonds we have. Your children chose greed over love, violence over respect, and attempted to discard you as if your lives had no value. The sentences handed down today reflect the severity of their crimes, but I know that no legal consequence can truly repair what was broken. She paused. I hope you find peace. I hope you find healing, and I hope you remember that the actions of 3 individuals do not define the capacity for love in this world. As this case has shown, there are still people who will stop, who will stay, who will fight for strangers simply because it's the right thing to do. Hold on to that. It's more precious than any property. The months after the trial were quiet ones. Harold and Dorothy settled back into their home, slowly reclaiming it from the shadows of what had happened there. They repainted the living room, the same living room where their children had attacked them, in soft shades of yellow and cream, colors that caught the light and made the space feel new. They rearranged the furniture. They took down old photographs and put up new ones. One photograph, framed and hung in a place of honor above the fireplace, showed Harold, Dorothy, and Marcus standing on the porch together. It had been taken by Gladys Pemberton at the Welcome Home gathering, and all three of them were smiling. Real smiles, not the kind you force for cameras. Marcus had moved into the area permanently. He'd found work as a driver for a local delivery company, smaller routes, no long hauls, home every night. He'd rented a small apartment in Clearwater, just 15 minutes from Harold and Dorothy's place, and he visited them several times a week, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just to sit on the porch and watch the sunset. He'd also started volunteering. The experience with Harold and Dorothy had awakened something in him, a need to help, to be present, to stop looking away. He connected with a local organization that supported elderly people at risk of abuse or abandonment, offering transportation to appointments, help with errands, or simply companionship. He became known in the community as someone who could be counted on, someone who showed up. "You're becoming quite the local hero," Dorothy teased him one evening as they sat down to dinner. "I'm not a hero," Marcus said. The same thing he always said. "I'm just a guy who finally figured out what matters." "And what's that?" Marcus looked around the table, at Dorothy, at Harold, at the meal they'd prepared together, at the warmth and light of a home that had been reclaimed from darkness. "This," he said, "people, connection, being there for each other. That's what matters. Everything else is just noise." In February, 6 months after the trial, something unexpected happened. Harold received a letter. It was from Thomas, written from the state correctional facility where he was serving his sentence. Harold almost threw it away unopened. What could his son possibly say that would matter now? But something made him hesitate. He sat down at the kitchen table, Dorothy beside him, and opened the envelope. "Dear Dad, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve either one. But I need to say some things, even if they disappear into silence. What we did was unforgivable. I've had 6 months to think about that. 6 months of nothing but time and regret, and I still can't understand how I let it happen. How I stood there and watched Michael hurt you and Mom. How I helped carry you to the car. How I said nothing when we left you on that highway. I could blame Michael. I could say he pressured me, manipulated me, that I was always the weak one, who just went along with whatever my older siblings wanted. And that's true, as far as it goes, but it's not an excuse. I was 43 years old, a grown man. I made choices, and those choices nearly killed you. I've been thinking a lot about when we were kids. Do you remember teaching me to fish? I was maybe 8 or 9, and I couldn't get the hang of casting. I kept tangling the line, getting frustrated, wanting to quit. You sat with me for hours, patient as anything, showing me the motion over and over until I finally got it. You never yelled, never made me feel stupid, just kept believing I could do it until I believed it too. That's who you were, Dad. That's who you and Mom both were. Patient, kind, always there. And we repaid you with violence and abandonment. We took everything you gave us and decided it wasn't enough. We wanted more. We wanted everything. I'm so sorry. Those words aren't enough. They'll never be enough, but they're all I have. I don't expect you to write back. I don't expect you to visit. But if you ever find it in your heart to forgive me, even a little, I want you to know that I'm trying to become someone worthy of it. I'm in therapy here, working through things I should have dealt with decades ago. I'm taking classes. I'm trying to understand how I became someone who could hurt the people who loved me most. I love you, Dad. I love Mom. I know that sounds hollow after everything, but it's true. I always loved you. I just lost my way. Your son, Thomas. Harold read the letter twice. Then he set it down on the table and stared at it for a long time. What do you think? Dorothy asked. I think he means it. Whether that matters, I don't know. But I think he means it. Are you going to write back? Harold considered the question. 6 months ago, he would have said no without hesitation. His children had forfeited any claim to his love, his attention, his forgiveness. They had made their choice, and they could live with the consequences. But something had shifted in Harold during these months. Watching Marcus choose them, choose kindness, choose presence, choose family, had reminded him of something he'd almost forgotten. Love wasn't a transaction. It wasn't something you gave only when it was deserved. It was something you chose, freely, even when it cost you. Maybe especially when it costs you. I don't know, Harold said honestly. I'm not ready yet, but maybe someday. Dorothy nodded. She understood. Healing wasn't a destination. It was a journey, and sometimes the road was longer than you expected. Spring came early that year. The apple trees Harold had planted decades ago burst into bloom, filling the air with sweetness. The garden Dorothy had tended for 45 years showed the first green shoots of new growth. The porch steps, the new ones, built by community volunteers, held firm under their feet as they sat outside in the evening warmth. Harold was 74 now. Dorothy was 72. They moved a little slower, hurt a little more, carried scars both visible and invisible, but they were alive, they were together, and they had discovered something precious in the wreckage of their old life. They had discovered that the family could be rebuilt. Marcus came for dinner every Sunday. George from the Pine Rest stopped by on Wednesdays with fresh bread from the bakery next door. Patricia Chen, their attorney, had become a friend, joining them for holidays and bringing her teenage daughter, who loved hearing Dorothy's stories about the old days. Gladys Pemberton organized monthly gatherings of what she called the Highway Family, everyone who had helped Harold and Dorothy in the aftermath of their abandonment. The house that had once felt empty now felt full. Different than before, there would always be an ache where Michael, Jennifer, and Thomas used to be, but full nonetheless, full of laughter and conversation and the simple warmth of people who cared about each other. One Sunday evening in late April, as the sunset painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, Marcus sat on the porch with Harold and Dorothy, watching the light fade. "Can I tell you something?" Marcus said. "Always," Dorothy replied. "When I stopped my truck that day, I thought I was doing something small, helping two people, calling the police, maybe giving a statement. I figured I'd be back on the road in a few hours, and I'd never see you again." He paused. "I had no idea it would change my life." "How has it changed?" Harold asked. Marcus thought about it. "Before I met you, I was running. Not literally. I was driving, which I guess is kind of the same thing. I was running from my mother's death, from my guilt about not being there, from everything I'd failed to do and be. I kept moving, because if I stopped, I'd have to face all of it." He looked at Harold and Dorothy. "Stopping for you made me stop for myself. It made me realize that all that running wasn't getting me anywhere. The only way forward was to stand still, to be present, to let myself feel the things I'd been avoiding." He smiled slightly. "You didn't just get a family out of this. I did too." Dorothy reached over and took his hand. "We found each other," she said. "That's what matters. Not how or why, just that we did." The three of them sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, one by one, in the darkening sky. "You know what I've been thinking about lately?" Harold said. "What's that?" "Those 19 cars. The ones that drove past us without stopping." He shook his head slowly. "I used to be angry at them. So angry. How could they see two injured old people and just keep going? What kind of world produces people like that?" "And now?" Marcus asked. "Now I think they were afraid. Not of us, of what helping us would mean. The time, the effort, the disruption to their lives. It's easier to look away than to get involved. I understand that now. I've done it myself, more times than I want to admit." He turned to look at Marcus. "But you didn't look away. You stopped. And that single choice, that one moment of courage, it rippled outward. It brought us here, to this porch, to this family, to this life we never expected." He paused. "One person, making one choice, can change everything. That's what I've learned. That's what you taught me." Marcus didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded, his eyes bright. "So thank you," Harold said. "Thank you for stopping. Thank you for staying. Thank you for being the person you didn't have to be when we needed you most." Dorothy squeezed Marcus's hand. "Thank you for being our son," she said softly. "The son we didn't know we needed until you found us." The words hung in the air, sacred and simple. Marcus looked at the two people who had become his family, not through blood or obligation, but through choice, through the radical, transformative act of stopping when it would have been easier to keep going. "Thank you for letting me stay," he said. A year later, on the anniversary of the day, Marcus stopped his truck on Highway 44. Harold and Dorothy hosted a gathering. The house was full of people, friends, neighbors, members of the community who had become family. There was food and laughter and the comfortable chaos of people who belonged to each other. George told stories about the early days at the Pine Rest, when Marcus had been a stranger with a suspended license and a determination to help. Patricia Chen shared updates about new legislation protecting elderly people from financial abuse, legislation that Harold and Dorothy's case had helped inspire. Gladys Pemberton led everyone in a toast to second chances and unexpected blessings. And Marcus stood on the porch, watching it all, feeling something he'd spent years searching for and finally found. Home, not a place, not a building, but a feeling, a connection, a belonging. He thought about his mother, gone now for 7 years. He liked to imagine she could see this, see the man he'd become, the family he'd found, the purpose he'd discovered. He liked to think she would be proud. Tell Marcus I know he tried. He had tried, he was still trying, and for the first time in his life, it felt like enough. Dorothy appeared beside him, slipping her arm through his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "My mom. How much she would have liked you and Harold. How much I wish she could have been here." "She is here," Dorothy said gently. "In you, in the kindness she raised you with, in the choice you made to stop that day." She looked up at him. "The people we love don't really leave us. They live on in what they taught us, in who we become because of them." Marcus nodded, his throat tight. "Come inside," Dorothy said. "Harold's about to give a speech, and you know how he gets when he doesn't have an audience." Marcus laughed, a real laugh, warm and free, and followed her into the house, into the light, into the family, into the life he'd found by choosing to stop when everyone else drove past.